Alright guys, in this final lecture, getting into modifying objects in Blender, we're going to go over a review of a lot of the keyboard commands we talked about, and I'm going to mention a few we haven't covered yet. So I want you guys to just keep in mind that all of these will really speed you up if you learn them, but you can always go through the menus and look these commands up in the global search menu that we discussed earlier if you don't really want to start off learning these right away. But once again, they are very handy. I would say I never really go through the menus if I can avoid it. 90% of the time, I'm just using my keyboard and my mouse, and that's why Blender is so fast. So let's get back into it. I'm going to briefly cover what we have already talked about. First of all, you know that if you select an object, you can move it around, rotate it, or scale it by using the G for move, S for scale, and R for rotate commands. So you're going to be using that quite a lot. Good to know. Also remember that if you come in here, you can also modify the commands that you're using by using X, Y, or Z to change the axis that you're transforming the object on. So very handy there. And you can also do things like, remember, you can start rotating and then you can type in a number down here, the bottom left hand corner, for how many degrees you want to rotate by. So let's say I'm in the side view and I want to rotate this by 45 degrees. I can hit R and then type in 45. And there you go. So let's go over some things we might not have talked about in the 3D viewport and covered. In Blender, you don't just have to keep everything visible all at once in the scene. You can hide and unhide things as you need to. So if you're in object mode and you have an object selected or anything selected, if I hit H, it's going to hide that. Now it's not gone. I didn't delete it. It's just hidden. So if you see in the outliner up here, that lamp is still there. It's just not on. And this is really a shortcut for this here. So if I turn this back on, it's going to come back. And now the way to do that with the keyboard is if I hit H to hide it, I can hit Alt-H to unhide it. And that's as simple as that. So it works on objects. And it's really helpful. Now this also works in edit mode. So if I'm in edit mode and I go in here and I've got something selected, if I hit H, it's going to hide everything that I selected and everything connected to what I was selecting. So I'm only left with this part of the cube. So again, Alt-H unhides. And, let's get a sphere up there so I can show you an example of when this would be helpful. So I've got a UV sphere, and I scale this up. This sphere is made up of a whole bunch of squares. And, let's say that you're doing the sphere for some sort of like environment that you're building, and then inside you've got other stuff going on. Well, if you zoom in, you can get inside the sphere and rotate around and, stuff like that. And that's all well and good. But, let's say you're in the side view and you're modifying, the sphere. You've got these things selected here. You've started to kind of build out some weird shapes, and you're in here with the circle select, and you've got this selection here. And you want to start, building out this into something a little more complicated. Let's say I extrude this out here. Well, the second I want to get in here and start modifying things from the inside, I've got to try to zoom in, rotate around, get in here, move around, and start tweaking things in here. And it's going to get hard to work because of the reason we talked about earlier, where if you zoom off to the side, it's hard to kind of see what's going on. Same thing's going to happen if you're zoomed way far in here and you're trying to move around. So what you can do that will help you out a lot is if you go to a view, I'm going to be able to select part of this cube like this. If I hit H, it's going to hide that. And now I can just see inside from way out here. So if I want to model out part of this section or build things on the inside of this, I can do it. And then remember, that's not gone. If I hit Alt-H, it's going to come right back. Everything's still joined and right where it should be. And so it's a good way if you like to work on the inside of objects, get in there and really see what's going on behind the scenes within your object, you can get in there and do that, and that's a great way to do it. Now, one of the things we covered in the last lesson that I'm going to go over again is the shading thing. If you're down here and you're going to by default be put into solid mode, if you want to see through your object, you can hit Z and it'll put you into wireframe view. Now, that's great because, again, you're going to be able to see all the way through your object, but it's also useful for selections. If I box select here in shaded mode, it's only going to select stuff on that side. But if I'm in wireframe and I select, it's going to select everything that I see there. So you can see how I can select things through the model to the other side. So pretty handy there. You can also move objects in your scene onto what are called layers. So that's pretty handy to go over. By default, you're going to be put on the first layer, which is down here at the very bottom of your viewport. You can see this little box that's checked, and then there's a dot in it. That dot means that there's something on the layer. By clicking on these buttons, you can change what layer is currently visible. And it also works by shift selecting if you want to select more than one layer. And so if you never mess with layers, you're only ever going to be working on the first one. But let's say your scene got really complicated, you had a whole bunch of stuff going on, and you just wanted to kind of move things out of the way so you could work on one thing at a time. Well, what you can do is move things on different layers. So if I hit the keyboard shortcut M here, it's going to allow me to move whatever I've selected onto another layer by clicking another layer. And again, that's not gone, it's just moved. So if you look down here again, you're going to have whatever layer you're on, and then any other layer here that has a dot has something in it. So if I click here, now I'm just going to go to the second layer, and it's going to have my object. And again, I can move it back by hitting M, moving that, and then go on back to the first layer. You can also toggle between layers automatically using the numbers at the very top of your keyboard. So 1 through whatever will switch these layers by default. If you'll remember earlier on, because I didn't have a numpad on the far right of my keyboard, I set my preferences up to use this emulate numpad. So I'm not going to be able to use that keyboard shortcut for these layers anymore unless I turn this off. And if I turn that off, now you can see if I use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 across the top of my keyboard, it's going to change what what layer is showing. So I'm going to turn the emulate numpad back on because it's actually a little more useful for me since I don't have that numpad. And instead, I'll just click the layers that I want to use. So let's go back to this first layer. And let's keep reviewing. So in object mode, there's several basics that we've discussed that come in really handy. You know X deletes, so let's get rid of that. Let's put a cube back there. Shift D is one we may not have gone over, and it will allow you to duplicate objects. So if I hit Shift D and start moving, it's going to copy whatever I had selected. So I can just keep doing that, and now I've got copies. Now there's a command that's a lot like Shift D, but instead of Shift D, it's Alt D. And Alt D will do pretty much the exact same thing, except if I copy things with Alt D instead of Shift D, then you'll see if I go into one of these, they're all linked. So here's the difference. If I edit one of these cubes that I just copied with Shift D, nothing's really going to happen to the other cubes. They're all separate. They're all different objects. You know, they're not connected. But remember how we discussed selection and edit mode with linking? Well, the same thing works here because we've copied objects that are linked. If I go into any of these and I edit part of that object, like let's say I edit this top face. If I scale that in, everything that's linked is going to be a copy of that. So it's going to do the exact same thing I do there. So it might be a fast way to get in here and make some models. And those are always linked until you tell it not to be linked. So let's go over one of the other commands that are helpful when you're trying to duplicate objects out like this. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of everything, put a cube back in the scene, and let's go over how to repeat something. So let's say I've Shift D moved over and copied an object. Now I want to keep copying it in a row, but I want to keep doing that at the exact same distance apart. Well, if I hit Shift R for repeat, it'll just keep doing what I just did. But this doesn't just work for the duplicate command. If I've got all of these selected and let's say I rotate them by 10 degrees, if I hit Shift R, it's going to just keep doing what I just did till I stop hitting this. And so it's really useful. It's just a repeat command for anything you just did. So if you've got something that you're working on and you know, you're kind of rotating it all, duplicating things or putting them, you know, by certain degrees apart, or doing anything repetitive in terms of stuff in Blender, it's going to really be something that can speed you up. Let's go into edit mode and we'll kind of review and talk about geometry tweaking one more time. So I'm in edit mode. Remember, tab goes in and out of edit mode, so there's your keyboard shortcut for that. Let's get rid of a couple of faces. So we're going to right click, hit X, and it's going to say what I want to delete, and I'm going to select faces. To make a face, we're going to go select how we want to create the face by selecting what it's at least 3 points that's going to make it up, and we're going to hit F to fill that, make a face. So that's how we would put all these back into place. Let's go to face mode, right click that bottom face. Now let's go over extrude again. If we're in here, we want to add some more geometry, we can hit E, and then it will keep doing that. Now here again, if I hit Shift R after I've done that, it's going to add more and more extrusions and allow me to go in here and you know, really kind of custom tweak this the way I want. So that's good. And we've also discussed the knife tool. So if I want to come in here and add some extra edges, I can hit K and it will automatically allow me to do that. Let's go ahead and escape. So knife can be good if you're doing more organic modeling and you want to do stuff by hand. But you know, this is a pretty industrialized sort of thing. It kind of reminds me of the top part of a castle tower or something like that. So if I'm doing that and I want to add edges, I want to make them perfect, you know. So if I go into edit mode, instead of using the knife tool, I'm going to use something that is called create edge loop. And what this does is if you hover over an edge and you hit Control R, now remember Shift R repeats, Control R adds an edge loop. And all you gotta do is hit Control R. It's gonna follow your mouse around to wherever you're hovering over an edge, and it's gonna try to create a loop that goes all the way around and connects back to the other side for you. So I use this probably more than I use the knife tool by a lot. And so if I want to add an edge, I left click, and I'm not done. If I keep moving my mouse around, it's gonna say, okay, you can create an edge, but where do you want it on that the edge that you're creating? Do you want it at the very top, at the very bottom, in the middle? And once you left click again, it will finalize where that's at, and you'll be done with adding a really even loop all the way around. Now there's some things to note that are going to make this even more useful. If I add an edge loop by hitting Control R, and you know, I want to make this perfect, I can also, if you see the bottom left hand corner, it says edge slide. Those numbers vary depending on where I put my mouse. If I type a number in like 0.8 and hit enter, it's going to put that at the specific location. Now if I want to do the same thing on this side, I can type in 0.8 and it's going to put it at exactly the same location as this one's located. So again, if you want to make things really uniform across your models, use your keyboard shortcuts, use your numbers, and instead of hitting 0.8 here again, I can hit 0.8 and then hit the minus sign for negative 0.8, and now it moves it in the exact opposite direction, exact same distance apart from this edge as from this edge. So again, really useful. And as you can see, if I go back now and I add a modifier like subdivision, now I've really added some nice edges in right here, 0.8. And I can just keep going in and adding those bordering edges that are really closely bunched up together. And it's going to allow me to really crease these edges out. So as you can see, if I smooth that with that smooth button, now I've got some really nice edges for that tower rooftop. So pretty handy. And again, that's pretty much how I model everything. All right, guys, let's remember that if you forget anything, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to remember all of these keyboard shortcuts today. That's not important. 9 times out of 10, like, I memorized probably 10 to 20, maybe a little more than that. If you know, I'm getting into something I've used quite a few years. But there's a lot of things I can't remember, or that just don't have, you know, keyboard shortcuts by default. One of them, a perfect example, is edge slide. So let's say I've put this edge loop in here, and I select it. To do that, by the way, I'm holding Shift and Option, and I'm right-clicking part of this edge, and it will just select the whole loop for me, so I don't have to sit there and go around and do that. Let's say I want to move that entire edge. Well, I can do that here because it's easy. Everything's still on the vertical axis, you know, I can do that here. But let's say I want to move this edge closer up to this this cone top here, and I can't just do that by moving it up, because by doing this, I'm going to have to like try to select part of the, let's go ahead and get this other edge in here. There we go. So if I want to move this up and move it along this edge right here, I can't just move it up because it's going to make everything bigger. Then I have to try to scale it in again, match it, and that's just it's not a good way to work. So I use a tool called Edge Slide. Now there's not a keyboard shortcut for this set up by default. So if you come over here to this menu, you can slide edge with this button and it will do it for you. But again, I don't usually do that. I find it quicker to just go to the space bar, type in edge, and then I usually go down to edge slide, which is right here, and I do that. Now again, it may seem counterintuitive. If you see this button up here and it's up and you're going to use that, that's fine. I would really recommend coming in here and assigning a keyboard shortcut for it. But again, I usually have edge slide already searched for. I use that, and then it allows me to move that edge around and really change how things look. So that's a really useful tool, and again, I use that quite a lot. And that's going to wrap us for keyboard shortcuts. So again, I would really recommend you guys review this lesson and all the previous ones to kind of get a feel for the keyboard shortcuts again. Let them sink in, practice, and you're going to get them really quickly. It's not going to take you quite a long time to get in here and use them. As long as you're using them to model and using them on a daily basis, you're going to learn them really quickly. So in the final lecture of the modeling section, you're going to see a demonstration from beginning to end of an advanced model built by me in 3D. And it's going to be the fire hydrant that I talked about before. So as you follow along, I'm going to speed things up so you can see me do all of it in one lecture. It's going to be about 20 minutes long. And I'm just going to kind of go in there and give you a discussion of how I implemented all the past sections into building the object, and how you can do the same thing for your models. So I'm going to see you there.